I stood there in the pouring rain, watching my own son's designer luggage being tossed onto the curb like bags of trash. And for the first time in 18 years, I didn't feel a single ounce of guilt. He looked at me with those cold, entitled eyes, screaming that I was the worst mother in the world and that I would regret this day forever. But all I felt was a strange, terrifying sense of peace. I had given him everything, my career, my savings, my youth. And in return, he had turned our home into a battlefield where I was the only casualty. People tell me that a mother's love should be unconditional, that you never turn your back on your own flesh and blood no matter how toxic they become. But after what he did to me last night, I realized that if I didn't save myself, he was going to drown us both. Was I wrong for finally giving up on my child? Or would you have reached your breaking point a long time ago too? Please tell me if I'm the monster here, because right now, I just feel like a survivor. To understand how we got to that rainy sidewalk, you have to understand that Leo wasn't always like this. When he was little, he was my shadow, a sweet boy who would bring me wilted dandelions from the yard and tell me I was the most beautiful woman in the world. His father left when Leo was only 3, disappearing into a new life with a new family, and leaving us with nothing but a stack of mounting bills and a hole in our hearts. I made a vow that day that Leo would never feel the void his father left. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, pulling double shifts at the hospital as a nurse and then spending my weekends cleaning houses just so he could have the best sneakers, the latest gaming consoles, and the chance to go to the private school across town. I thought that by filling his life with things, I was compensating for the lack of a father figure. I didn't realize I was actually planting the seeds of an uncontrollable monster. By the time he hit middle school, the please and thank you started to vanish, replaced by demands and eye rolls. If I couldn't afford the specific $500 jacket he wanted for the winter dance, he wouldn't just be disappointed. He would tell me I was a failure as a parent. I started skipping classes, and every time the principal called, I would rush to the school, making excuses for him, telling them he was just struggling with the trauma of his father's abandonment. I shielded him from every consequence, thinking I was being a protective mother, but I was really just teaching him that the rules didn't apply to him. As the years went on, my enabling behavior created a divide between me and the few friends I had left. They would try to warn me, telling me that I was raising a king who would eventually execute his own mother, but I wouldn't listen. I defended him at every family dinner, every PTA meeting, and every neighborhood gathering. I remember one specific summer when Leo was 14. He had stolen a neighbor's bike and sold it for parts. Instead of letting the neighbor call the police, I went over there, apologized profusely, and paid triple the value of the bike out of my own pocket just to keep his record clean. I told myself I was saving his future, but in reality, I was just teaching him that mommy's wallet was a get-out-of-jail-free card. I was working 70 hours a week at the hospital just to sustain the lifestyle he demanded. My health started to decline. I had chronic migraines and high blood pressure, but I couldn't afford to take a day off because Leo needed the latest virtual reality headset or a pair of sneakers that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. By his senior year of high school, the situation at home had become unbearable. I was bankrolling my own destruction, and I knew it, but the fear of him ending up on the streets kept me tethered to the abuse. My life had become a series of ifs. If I just give him this, he'll be happy. If I just ignore that comment, he won't get angry. If I just work one more shift, I can buy his silence. I was a shell of a human being, a walking ATM with a nursing degree. I had stopped buying new clothes for myself years ago. My scrubs were faded and thin, while Leo's closet was filled with brand-name hoodies and designer denim. The neighbors started looking at me with pity, which was almost worse than the anger. They saw me carrying heavy groceries up the driveway while Leo sat on the porch, scrolling through his phone, not even bothering to open the door for me. The real turning point happened about 6 months ago. Leo had graduated high school barely, and flatly refused to get a job or apply for college. He told me he was going to be a professional streamer, and that he needed me to invest $10,000 into a high-end PC setup and a dedicated fiber optic line for his room. When I told him I didn't have that kind of money, especially since I was still paying off the credit card debt I'd accumulated buying his graduation gifts, he lost it. He didn't scream this time. He just looked at me with a terrifyingly calm expression and said, "Fine. If you won't help me, I'll just have to find the money elsewhere. I didn't know what that meant until a week later when I went to pay my mortgage and found that my emergency savings account was nearly empty. He had found my banking passwords, which I'd written in a notebook in my nightstand, and transferred $3,000 to himself. When I confronted him, he didn't even deny it. He laughed. He told me that since I was going to leave him the house and the money when I died anyway, he was just taking his inheritance early. I threatened to call the police, but he just stepped into my personal space, looming over me, and whispered that if I did, he'd tell them I was abusive and that he'd make sure I lost my nursing license. I was trapped. I was a mother who was genuinely afraid of the person she had raised. Over the next few weeks, the theft escalated into psychological warfare. He started inviting strangers over at 3 a.m, people I didn't know, who looked as rough and entitled as he was. They would sit in my living room, smoking and drinking my expensive wine, while Leo bragged about how he ran the house. If I tried to come out and tell them to leave, Leo would laugh and tell his friends I was demented and losing my mind, further gaslighting me in front of strangers. I found myself hiding my jewelry, my passport, and even my work badges in the trunk of my car because I couldn't trust him not to sell them or destroy them out of spite. One morning, I woke up to find he had spray-painted "loser" across my bedroom door just because I refused to buy him a new leather jacket. The disrespect was a physical weight on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I spent hours at work crying in the supply closet, wondering where I had gone wrong. I had read every parenting book, tried every gentle discipline technique, and poured every drop of my soul into him. But the more I gave, the more he despised me for it. It was like he hated me for being the only person who actually cared. He viewed my love as a weakness, a resource to be exploited until there was nothing left but bone and dust. This brings us to the situation I was in last night. The night that finally broke the camel's back and forced me to make a choice that most parents would find unthinkable. I had finally managed to save up a little bit of money for a much-needed car repair. My old sedan was literally falling apart, and I needed it to get to work. I kept the cash hidden in a hollowed-out book on my shelf, thinking he'd never look there. But while I was at work, Leo decided he wanted to take his friends out to an expensive club in the city to celebrate one of them getting a new car. He searched my room, found the cash, and not only took it but also took my spare car keys. He doesn't even have a valid license because of a previous DUI that I had spent thousands on a lawyer to get reduced to a reckless driving charge. When I got home at midnight and saw my car gone and my room tossed, I sat on the floor and cried until I couldn't breathe. This was the boy I had sacrificed everything for, and he was literally stripping my life away piece by piece. He didn't just take the money, he took my dignity. He took the safety of my sanctuary. I realized that if he crashed that car and killed someone, or if he got caught again, he'd expect me to sell my soul to keep him out of jail. And the worst part was, I knew I'd probably do it out of habit. That realization was the most shocking part of all. I realized I was his enabler, his victim, and his ATM all rolled into one. And as long as I lived under that roof, I was helping him destroy me. The thought of him behind the wheel of my car, drunk or high, while I sat here powerless, was the final spark. I saw my whole future flash before my eyes. Years of court dates, debt, and the constant fear of a knock on the door. I realized that if I didn't stop him now, there would be no later. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice between continuing to be a victim or becoming the person he feared. Before I tell you the absolute chaos that happened when he finally drove my car back into the driveway at 3 a.m., I want you to pause and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have called the cops on your own son? Or would you have tried to forgive him one last time for the sake of family? I really need to know if you think my next move was justified. I didn't call the police right away. Instead, I went to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and sat in the dark, waiting. When his headlights finally swept across the living room walls at 3:15 a.m., I didn't feel angry anymore. I felt cold. Leo stumbled through the front door, smelling like expensive gin and cigarettes, laughing to himself. When he saw me sitting there, he didn't even look guilty. He just tossed my keys on the table and told me the car was running like crap, and that I needed to get it fixed soon. That was it. No apology for the stolen money, No concern for the fact that I had no way to get to my shift the next morning. I stood up and told him, very quietly, that he had until tomorrow morning to pack his things and leave. He laughed in my face, telling me I didn't have the guts to kick him out, and that he'd just call his aunt or his grandmother to tell them how crazy I was being. But I had already planned ahead. While I was waiting for him, I had sent a mass email to my entire family, his aunt, his grandmother, even his deadbeat father's brother, detailing every single thing Leo had done over the last year. I included screenshots of the bank transfers and photos of the room he had trashed. I burned the bridge for him before he could even step on it. I also included the recording I had secretly made on my phone of him threatening to lie to the nursing board to get my license revoked. I wanted everyone to see the snake I had been nurturing in my bosom. By 4 a.m., his phone started blowing up with angry texts from the very people he thought would protect him. His grandmother called him a disgrace to his father's name, which I knew would sting the most. He looked at his phone, his face turning from smug to pale, and for the first time he looked small. He tried to delete the email from my computer, but I had already locked it down. He started pacing the living room, realizing that his support system had evaporated in a single click. The power dynamic had shifted, and he could feel it. The next morning he woke up late, expecting breakfast as usual. Instead, he found me standing in the hallway with 2 large suitcases I'd bought at a thrift store weeks ago, just in case. I told him the locks were being changed at noon, and that the police were already aware of the unauthorized use of my vehicle and the theft of the cash. I told him I wouldn't press charges if he left right now and never stepped foot on my property again. He went ballistic. He started throwing things, screaming that I was a bitter old woman who was jealous of his youth. He tried to lunge at me to grab my phone, but I had a friend from work, a large security guard from the hospital named Marcus, waiting in the kitchen. When Leo saw him, he froze. Marcus didn't have to say a word. He just stood there with his arms crossed, a silent wall of reality. The reality finally hit him that the mommy he could bully was gone. He spent the next 2 hours frantically packing, crying and begging 1 minute, then spitting insults the next. He tried calling his grandmother, but she didn't even pick up the phone. She had seen my email. He realized he had nowhere to go. He even tried to call his father, the man who hadn't spoken to him in 15 years, hoping for some miraculous rescue. His father told him to never call again. That was the final blow. Leo fell to his knees in the middle of his messy room, sobbing that he was sorry, that he'd change, that he'd get a job at the local grocery store. But I'd heard it all before. I watched him pack his designer clothes, the shoes I'd gone into debt for, and the expensive electronics he'd manipulated me into buying. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, hollow fear. He realized that for the first time in his life, there was no net to catch him. I felt a pang of sadness as he zipped up his bags, the same bags I'd bought him for his 18th birthday, but the sadness didn't stop me. I walked him to the door and watched as he dragged his life out into the rain. As I watched him drag those bags out to the curb in the rain, I saw the little boy he used to be for a split second, and my heart ached. But then I remembered the empty bank account, the smashed door frames, and the fear I felt every time I heard his footsteps. I watched him get into an Uber he probably paid for with my stolen money. And as the car pulled away, I went inside and locked the door. For the first time in years, the house was silent. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of a war that had finally ended. I spent the next few days cleaning. I scrubbed every surface, threw away the trash he'd left behind, and painted over the loser tag on my door with a bright, clean white. Each stroke of the brush felt like I was reclaiming my own identity. I replaced the broken door frames and finally got my car fixed. The mechanic told me I was lucky the engine hadn't blown, and I felt like that was a metaphor for my entire life. I was lucky I hadn't blown. He's been blowing up my phone from different numbers, claiming he's sleeping on a park bench, then claiming he's found a great new place, and doesn't need me anyway. He sent me a picture of a ramen noodle cup, saying hope you're happy I'm starving, followed 10 minutes later by a voice note of him screaming that he hates me. I haven't replied. I sold my house 2 weeks later, and moved to a smaller apartment in a different town, one he doesn't have the address to. I changed my number, I changed my locks, and I'm changing my life. I'm finally learning how to live for myself again. And although the silence is sometimes lonely, it is never, ever scary. I realized that being a mother doesn't mean being a martyr. And sometimes the best thing you can do for a child who won't listen is to let them feel the cold, hard ground beneath their feet. I went back to the hospital and requested more shifts. Not because I needed the money for Leo, but because I wanted to save up for a trip to Italy. A place I've dreamed of visiting since I was 20, but could never afford because I was too busy buying Leo's affection. I've started going to a support group for parents of estranged children, and hearing their stories made me realize I wasn't alone. There are so many of us who have been held hostage by the very children we gave life to. I'm learning that it's okay to choose yourself. It's okay to say no more. It's okay to breathe. I know some people will think I'm cruel for leaving him with nothing, but I truly believe that if I hadn't let him go, he would have ended up in prison or worse, and he would have taken my life down with him. I had to choose between being a mother to a ghost or being a woman who still has a future. I see him sometimes on social media through a fake account I made. He looks disheveled, hanging out with the same bad crowd, still trying to stream from a cheap laptop in someone's basement. Part of me wants to reach out, to send him $50 for a hot meal, but I know that $50 would just be the first step back into the cycle. I have to stay strong. I have to remember that he is an adult now, and the world is the only teacher he will ever listen to. My sister told me recently that Leo reached out to her, begging for a place to stay, and she told him the same thing I did. Until he gets a job and shows real change, the door is closed. It feels good to know my family finally has my back. I am enjoying my quiet coffee, my clean kitchen, and my freedom. I've even started a garden on my balcony, growing actual dandelions and roses, and they don't wilt because I actually have the time and energy to care for them. I'm not a monster. I'm a woman who finally remembered she exists. I'm rediscovering hobbies I abandoned 20 years ago. Painting, reading, just sitting in the park and watching the sunset without checking my watch to see if I need to be home to cook for a grown man who hates me. My blood pressure has dropped to normal levels, and my migraines are gone. I feel younger than I have in a decade. If Leo ever truly learns his lesson, maybe one day we can have a relationship again, but it will be on my terms, and it will be built on respect, not exploitation. Until then, I am living my life, one peaceful day at a time. Like this video if you think I made the right choice and that sometimes tough love is the only love left to give. Subscribe for more stories like this. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. I'm still processing everything and your perspectives really help. I'll see you all in the next story.